I'm very honored to be here sitting with two very powerful women, women who I've admired through their work in strengthening our communities and the long track record they both have in that area. I've had the chance to meet with Tina Fox and spend some time with her abroad in Europe and doing some work there, and knowing that she's doing tremendous work in her First Nation in Morley, the Nakoda First Nation, and working with young children in the school there. And so it's wonderful to see you again, and thanks for coming to this conversation. And Stephanie Harpe is known quite well as a performer, a blues and R&B singer, and she's an incredible power and force with that. However, what she really has demonstrated her leadership in is working in our communities to strengthen it, to address those social injustices as well. So I'm very honored to sit with two very powerful women who will share with us their thoughts on some of these questions that we have today, particularly around the missing and murdered Indigenous women's inquiry. And we know that there are a number of controversies, a number of issues that have really divided our community. And you know, some of these controversies are legitimate. Some of them are questionable. But we have to look more, I think, at the issue of how the overall inquiry is doing its work, and how we can improve it, of course, because we always can use an improvement. I think one of the controversies is the amount of time that the inquiry has not allowed for a really full amount of work, something that, you know, perhaps I would agree with. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission had 5 years to do their comprehensive inquiry, and they've only given 2 years for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so, for me, that's an important issue. But I think what is more important is that how the stories and how the women are treated in terms of how it comes out into the public, so that they understand more of the story of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and just how important and how deep that issue is within our communities. I don't know of anyone who has not been touched and moved by losing someone in their own family under mysterious circumstances, to suicide, to murder, to disappearances. And it's something that hasn't gone away, and it's something that is continuing. So not only are we looking to the past of that history and that stories, but also what is happening today, and what can we do for the future. So I'll ask the first question, and I'll ask Tina to lead us off in this discussion. How does a woman being murdered or going missing affect families and communities?
First of all, there are children that are left motherless. Recently, on my reserve, we had 2 women, 2 sisters murdered in Calgary. It's in the courts now, and between them they left 16 children. And it was a devastating loss. They were murdered and found in a burnt car. 2 people have been arrested, but they haven't been charged for these 2 women's murders. They were charged for the murder of one other person that was found near Bragg Creek. How they got involved, we have no idea. But it was a big shock to our community. And prior to that, I really didn't have any knowledge, I guess, or contact with missing and murdered women, per se. And this incident just made it real for my community.
Yes.
And I guess it's who's left behind, the children? Who's going to be looking after them? Fortunately, some of these nieces' children are grown up, so they've taken on the care of their siblings, younger siblings, or other families have taken their children. But you know, they now have to spend the rest of their lives without mom. Yeah. that's how it's affected them.
That's right. And Stephanie?
Well, from my personal experience, my mother was murdered here in 1999. I'm one of the families that did the public testimony at the inquiry. It was a 2-hour testimony. It's very tough because my life had changed. The guilt that I carry of being there when the killer was there has devastated my whole life. I don't think that if my mother was alive, I don't think I would have went down the road of addiction and abuse. And I did not, the way my mother's case was handled, and some horrible things were said by people, parties that are supposed to protect me. I did not feel valued. I didn't think my mother was valued. So in turn, the pain that had caused me to go down that dark road of drugs and addiction, I almost didn't live, and I almost didn't, after you're told for so long and that you see for so long that you're not a valued person, you start to believe it. And I didn't really value my life. I came very close to not being here. I came very close to not feeling of wanting to be here. So that's how it destroyed my life. But I found love. I found a safe space, and that changed my life forever. And I'm thankful to be here, strong and successful.
Yes. You testified before the inquiry.
Yes.
I was here in Edmonton not more than 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And, you know, the testimonies, the witnessing that happened there was a very, very powerful experience for people like me who were listening, you know, from the back wall. But you were front and center. What was that experience like for you?
I have to say that the inquiry put me in good company. I had working with the lawyer Breen, and it made it so it was easier for me because I didn't have that feeling where he was cold and distant. I felt like they genuinely did care. So I was put in a safe space with a safe person, and that helped me a lot. Yeah. You know, when you're speaking from your life, there's nothing really that can prepare you for the effect it's going to have on other people. That was 2 hours of telling my life story. And so, yeah, it was really, really tough. But there were other supports there. But see, I've been doing this for years. I've been speaking for about 3 or 4 years now. I'm healed. I'm strong enough to do this. I want to be a voice for those that can't. It was really, really difficult, I have to say. But I have no regrets because everything crucial I wanted out there got out there.
Yes.
And I saw the reaction of the people. I saw the reaction of even the cameraman. And I knew my work was done, and that it was needed, it was necessary, and it's going to help change the way people look at Indigenous, well, all avenues of where we're suffering, because we seem to be the highest statistic. So, yeah.
You know, you mentioned very briefly that there, you know, is some good things that happened there for you during the testimony. But I'll ask you both this question, just from your observations and your experience. What are things that they can do better for the inquiry process? And yeah, we'll start with that.
They need to have a database for all families. They don't have this. They tell us families to get a hold of them. And, you know, people in remote communities like yourselves, so, you know, cell service and all that stuff isn't sufficient. How are they supposed to contact when they don't have transportation, the technology? That's a problem. That's a big problem they need to consider. So they should be really reaching out to the families and to reaching out to the communities and getting all of the families' information, creating the database, which is going to help immensely. And then they need to have better aftercare and communication with the families. Some of the families were not able to attend for certain reasons, and some of them were not properly informed, and that really hurt a lot of people who wanted to be there and have their voice heard. So yes, that's a big thing. And then being more open-minded to the grassroots organizations as well. Communication is the biggest lack right now.
Yes. And any observations from your experience?
There wasn't the two nieces that were murdered a year ago. There wasn't much data for my community, and communication about their demise was made through the police, the RCMP, to the families. So yeah, the communication is a big lack. And even now, you know, it has happened, and we don't know anything about how the kids are doing.
Yeah. And they didn't do much advertising.
No.
They probably didn't let your community know, you know. So that's a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem. Yeah.
So what would you see then? You know, because we know that the list of criticism is quite long.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think are some of the good things, or what do you see as a good thing that this inquiry is doing?
I haven't kept up with the inquiry. All we read about is the firings and the quittings and resignations and going on, and I'm thinking, what really is going on, you know, with this inquiry?
Sure.
Because I think families of missing and murdered women are feeling unheard and not understood. Their stories are not being believed, maybe. I don't know what it is, but I've heard families of murdered and missing women say that they're not hearing us.
Mm-hmm.
They're not listening to what we have to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So. I was fortunate. I was fortunate, though. I had a good experience, to tell you the truth. I was cared for. I was looked after. I was prepared. I was contacted. I was called. Even aftercare.
Yes.
They just called me last week and asked me if I needed any kind of counseling services or anything like that. But you see, because of who I am, is that because of who I am? If I was just a family that was unknown to the public eye, would it be different?
Yeah, I don't know if that kind of support is available for the
The
children
common-
of these two,
Yes.
the 16 children.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if that's available. to
See,
them.
that's the thing that I questioned myself.
Mhm.
If I was just someone from the community that didn't have a name,
Yeah,
would I have been treated differently?
That's
yeah,
right.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah. Because with these, at the time, the families of these women, my nieces, tried to get funding for their kids and for the funeral and stuff. A GoFundMe, somebody put up a page. They only got about $300 from people. But there was a dog that needed medical treatment in Cochrane. They went to GoFundMe. They got $20,000 in what, 2 days?
That's unfortunate.
$300 for 16 orphaned children.
Yes. Yeah.
That, you know,
Mhm.
go figure.
Mhm.
Where are the values of people?
Well, that's, you know, that is true, because the inquiry is an inquiry. It's a very formal process and everything, and I think publicly, if we keep our eye just on the inquiry, we're never really going to see that human face. We're never going to see your mother's face. We're never going to see that mother's face of those kids. What do you guys think about the root causes that make Indigenous women vulnerable and increase their chances of going missing or being killed?
For me, ever since contact, First Nations people have been dehumanized. They didn't even consider us real humans, I guess. And the colonization and policy of assimilation dehumanized us. And that prevails today to some extent. Despite everything that's being done by people, you know, like yourselves, trying to put a word out there, we are portrayed as pagans and heathens and whatever, and we're portrayed as tax burdens and drunks, addicts, and you know, that kind of attitude, I guess, towards us makes the general population not really value us as people, as valuable people who have contributed so much to this community, this country. But it's, and then it's the impact of intergenerational trauma that causes some women to live risky lives, you know. Perhaps they have been abused in their homes. I grew up in a home where I witnessed my dad beating up my mother frequently, and there's residential school survivors. And my father was a very angry man. I don't know what happened to him, but I witnessed growing up. I witnessed him, and his discipline to us was extreme. Like, I would end up with welts all over my body and stuff like that. And that stems from whatever happened in residential school. And that needs to be addressed, I think, brought out and somehow
I agree.
bring in healing to our communities.
Yes, I agree. That's one of the main root causes, and was for me is just a traumatic home from parent who survived residential school and just didn't, by the time they were adult, were just taught sexual abuse, violence. You're not valued. Didn't even know what love was. So how are they supposed to raise me? How was she supposed to, you know, when she did go and get help, the doctors threw pills at her and they put my mother through shock treatment. My mother was never the same. That affected my life. So that's one of the root causes, is residential school for all this trauma. This trauma that we have has been embedded in our DNA. It's not going anywhere. So that's one of the root causes, is just an abusive home that you're trying to escape that abuse. And you yet sympathize for them because it wasn't their fault, it wasn't their choice. So that's a big root problem. And addiction, and behind addiction is pain, always pain. So as long as the government continues to ignore us, and now that it's out there to the public, now that some of them are more knowledgeable and they're more sympathetic, which is wonderful, but we need the healing, and the government should be providing that for First Nations people of this country, that what they traumatize their most vulnerable people.
Yes, and both of you, what are your thoughts on the role that poverty and a lack of resources play in this picture?
A huge role. Everything on reserves are underfunded to begin with, you know, and people, when you come out of residential school, you have no self-esteem. You think you're less than other people, and residential schools went up to grade 8, so that was the extent of your education when you came out. No chance to go to university or anything like that. And but that has changed drastically, thank God. Now we have
Doctors and
doctors
lawyers.
and nurses, and yeah, I thank the Creator for that. But underfunding is always the problem, I think.
Yeah.
Even our shelters, they had to fight for equal pay. The shelters on reserves had to fight for equal pay with provincial shelters.
No different than the, it shows the same pattern with education.
Education, yes.
Yes.
And other social programs that are delivered on First Nations are
Mhm.
severely underfunded,
Mhm.
up
Child
to
welfare.
50% as it being a conservative number.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Child welfare
Yeah.
is another example as
Mhm.
well.
Because of my traumatic home, I wasn't able to finish school.
Mhm.
I wanted to get out of my home as soon as I could. I couldn't finish school. So that's a big root problem. Trying to just escape that trauma. It all comes back to colonization, residential school, 60 scoop, all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, one of the controversies, or one of the issues, I should say, is the count of how many Indigenous women and girls have gone missing or
Mhm.
murdered. And that's a number that fluctuates. Most agree that it's not an accurate number.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I think it's around 3,000 or 4,000 is some guesstimations right now.
Mhm.
But it all leads back to the point that you're both talking about, the importance of family and the importance of community,
Mhm.
and the importance that community plays in how they support women's needs. And we talked about abuse and domestic violence as being a part of this bigger picture.
Mhm.
So what would you think, and I'll ask you first, what role can shelters play in supporting Indigenous women, their children, and their communities?
Well, I know from experience for some other ladies that have been trying to escape their abusive environment, is the first thing is, how are they going to take me and all my kids? And can I get someone to help me get out of here safely?
Yes.
Will there be someone, a moving company, or someone's going to help me move my things out of here? This is all, because the kids got to go to school, the mother's got to try to keep her job. This is transportation is a big issue as well. Transportation is the biggest issue. So moving them, getting them into that safe space, and then the healing process from there is immensely important. But for the whole family as a unit, so that's a big thing, because they feel stuck. They feel very, very stuck, and sometimes not believed, and not taken seriously. I know a lot of officers who are great officers, but I also know a lot of officers that aren't sympathetic and usually don't believe what's going on. So depends on who the abuser is as well. That's a problem when it's a powerful man.
Yes.
There needs to be steps taken to where a woman should feel, and her children feel protected, that they can go to someplace, the authorities, but unfortunately sometimes that doesn't all pan out that well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, especially before we had our shelter. Women, I have heard of women who spent the night with their kids in the bush trying to get away from the man who was beating her up. We did that with my mother, as a kid. And, or they would go to the mother's parents' place, who are scared that the man is going to come and beat them up too.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of women get encouraged to stay in the home for the sake of the children. So what is a woman to do?
Mm-hmm.
But I think shelters we saw that need, and so we built that shelter on the reserve, and it's helping people. But shelters have a platform to educate the community about the abuse that's happening. And it's happening with our people too. And educating young people, the shelter at Eagle's Nest has a worker who has formed a boys group at the elementary school.
Yes.
To teach. I don't know, I haven't sat in on her group work, but she's working with the boys.
Yes.
To, I think, build up a healthy self-esteem and esteem for others. But I think that's a good move. And shelters on reserves don't have secondary housing. That is another issue that we have, because housing on reserves are totally lacking.
That's right.
There's, you know, I do home visits in my capacity at work, and you go into one home and there could be 15, 20 people living in the same place. You know? So women that are in abusive situations sometimes have no place to go. There was none when I removed my daughter, but luckily we found a place for her to go to. So
A lot too, I think, is advertising.
Yeah.
The power of advertising is huge. A lot of women, you know, they'll open a phone book or whatever, and they got to talk to strangers. A lot of them don't know exactly the process. They don't have the right awareness, education into what their options are.
Yes.
So I think a pamphlet, an advertisement is very much key.
Yes.
Yeah, and for them to go to where they know the high risk areas are.
Yeah. Well, you know, we don't have enough First Nation shelters. That's for sure.
yeah.
The majority of the population of shelters across the province, in the cities and towns, have a large number of Indigenous women there. And I think one thing that I'm sure a lot of people would want to ask is how can they better improve service to and relationship to Indigenous women in these shelters.
Bring in more Aboriginal liaisons to where, so historically we've always been guarded, okay? So if we see another Indigenous person, it's easy for us to open, it's easy for us to feel a little bit more safer and not judged. So that's great. And to, you know, maybe involve elders is great, because then you get another way of healing a person who's not urban, but a person who is from a community that is more traditional, so they don't feel that loneliness or that isolation. Also, healing is just the biggest thing that you can do, is getting them the counseling, getting them the supports, and just, you know, letting them know they're just not alone, because many of them do feel alone. So yeah.
And education, I think, is key. A lot of the women that have gotten married young don't have much education, so they don't have knowledge of all the resources that are available outside the reserve, I guess, in my case. And I think we need to push education, attendance, proper attendance, and make sure that the young people are getting properly educated, especially the young women, so that they don't become dependent on an abusive man, totally dependent on an abusive man. And building up self-esteem, I think. And I think working with the men too, the men need to heal.
Yes. They
are abusive because they saw abuse growing up, probably, and it's a learned thing, abusing other women, because before contact, men were taught to respect women. They are the mothers who nurtured them. They have to value the woman and respect that woman and honor that woman. But that's been lost now,
Yes,
kind of. Some people still, traditional people still teach it, so thank God.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to go back to those teachings too, and
For the
teach
men.
the young men,
Yeah.
young men, that it is more honorable to respect and honor a woman than to beat her up.
Yes.
You know, I think we need to start doing that with our young people.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
important message, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been asking all the questions. Now I want to turn it to our viewers and see if we have any questions out there that they would like to ask our guests, Stephanie and Tina.
Thank you so much for sharing. The questions is, you mentioned including shelter, one way shelters can help is to bring in more Aboriginal liaisons and elders. And you also mentioned that your experience when giving testimony at the inquiry, they did a really good job of creating a safe space and putting you with a safe person. So are there any other ways that shelters can create safe spaces, whether they're on reserve or in the city, for Indigenous women, whether it's the physical space, the emotional space, the spiritual space? Are there things that you can think of that have helped you in the past, or that you think would help other women and children to create that feeling of safety in shelter?
So I got well with more contact with women like myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to have those women and those children have more contact and maybe more sharing circles.
Mm-hmm.
And having the kids express themselves as well, because this affects them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes this abuse and this change affects them for their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So really, about us women helping each other and having more contact and more of a sharing circle, those kids need it too.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids need it too.
Yeah.
They remember these things. There's a certain age, they say about maybe 4, where you start remembering everything. But trauma, you can start remembering things earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's really important, where not only are they, because they're all multicultural people here that are living this, but it's something horrible is bringing them together.
Mm-hmm.
But in that being together, they can draw strength by just supporting one another. And I think that's important, whether they have that in shelter or in urban or off reserve, is just that they have that communication with each other. And then the individual healing, the privatized healing, yeah, that's really important. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Enhancing the victim's skills, job skills, or somehow getting them back into maybe even learning a trade, to better their education, so that they can, once they're out of the shelter, they need to know where to go to get better educated, to provide for their families. But I think their skills have to be enhanced too, because most of them may not. Although abuse happens in all levels of life.
Yes.
You know,
That's right.
the rich abuse their women. It's everywhere. It's not just impoverished people that are abusing. It's rich people too. But I think particularly on our reserves, we need to enhance the skills of the victims.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
that's great.
That was a good question. Do we have another?
I do. What advice might you have for shelters, and considering maybe particularly urban shelters, ones that maybe have a large proportion of non-Indigenous staff. Do you have any advice if they want to start being more involved in advocacy and education around Indigenous issues like missing and murdered Indigenous women? If they want to begin that journey, do you have any advice for how they can do that respectfully, how they can do it in a way that is truly is helpful? Yeah.
So everyone knows now about residential school and what has happened to us, and everyone knows that we've always had to survive our country, even now. And people think that a lot of these things have stopped. They haven't stopped. They're just hidden in modern ways. And Canada's little dark circles and corners. And so I think that if the person is well educated in what has happened to us and why we're in these environments and why we're, you know, in need, if they let the person know that they know about your history and where you come from and where your pain is, and if you explain that to a person like me, that you know why I'm where I'm at, that would help a lot. That would really help a lot, because then I know that you're sympathetic and that you've taken the time to educate yourself into, you know, why we're the highest population of all horrible statistics in this country. So that would make a really, really big difference. And yeah, that would make a big difference in the world, yeah, yeah.
I think you mentioned bringing in knowledgeable elders, liaison workers. Calgary does have a Native women's shelter, Awatan, and my youngest daughter works there too. And they have different outreach programs for the children and exposing the children to various fun activities that they would never have at home. And I think that those kinds of programs will help the kids and give the mother time to rest, I guess, if to undergo counseling or whatever. Yeah.
Because they're suffering here.
Yeah.
Not just their bodies, they're suffering here, the aftermath of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, what am I going to do? Yeah.
After I leave this place.
Yeah, but I love your thing about the skills, because a lot of us women feel stuck because we are stuck. We don't have the education.
Yeah.
We don't have the transportation. But if I'm good at singing, maybe that's something that can take me somewhere. If I'm good at drawing, maybe that's something that can take me somewhere. If I know how to sew. So if after I'm approached and I feel safe and that you're sympathetic of my history and me as my suffering as an Indigenous person, after that the healing takes place, and then after that the skills. Very, very important, because then they feel like, okay, I can do this, but I can do it on my own, and I don't have to get another man and have that happen to me again. So just, you know, transportation and skills, very important for their future.
Yeah, that's right. Good point. Very good point. I think we have time for another one.
Yes, we do.
Good.
So on an organizational level, shelters that want to start improving their relationships with maybe Indigenous communities that surround them and working on being better neighbors and improving those relations so that they can better serve the women that come into their shelters. Do you have any advice or considerations that they should keep in mind when working towards, as an organization, building better relationships with communities and maybe other Indigenous organizations?
You're talking about non-native
Yes.
shelters.
Yeah.
Okay. For those urban shelters, they do have our people going to their shelters at times too, and I think they need to reach out to the women who have been in their shelters at the reserve level, because it's the only place they have to go back to. And keep the connection, and maybe connect with, but not all reserves have shelters on their reserves, but make a connection to the local
health center.
Health center. We
what I
have
was
different organizations, you know, social services and the schools, you know. I think they need to make a connection so that people know they are available, that there's a place to go to where somebody cares, you know.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Steph?
Yeah, I agree with that. I really think that there should be, you should reach out to someone who's a representative there in health, someone who's there in the school. Sometimes a woman won't report it to the health. Sometimes a child will tell you about their home. So I don't know what legal protocol is for that, but I also think that going out there to the community, asking their band office, who is the person that we can contact to build a relationship and bring you guys business cards, pamphlets, come do a prevention workshop, come in, you know, coming into the community, and some communities can actually help fund that. But again, here we come back to the government, where this is, they really should be funding all of this. They really should be putting all this money towards that. So hopefully that's something that the government will fund. If we're in the urban area here, all these communities around here should have, because of transportation is a problem and poverty is a problem, we need to go to them, and that's the perfect way, is a health worker. There has to be an Aboriginal representative liaison there that works in that knows their community, and that they have a good background as well. So we know we want to pick that right person that will plug you in there, and I think that's just the best way to go.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I know that our time is winding up here, but I think I just want to add to this conversation by saying that the preliminary report from the inquiry has been released now. Our Women Are Sacred, I believe, is what the title of it is. I would recommend to all shelters, staff, and administration to really have a good read of that document, because it'll give you some important background. It'll touch on some of the issues that have been presented in this conversation, and it'll be a good starting point. It is not a final document. It has some recommendations based on some very general things that have been brought forward. So it's a really good piece of information to really start to become familiar with, because we have to remember that this issue of missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, family violence, domestic violence, and abuse is not only an Indigenous problem, it's not only the woman's problem, but it's our problem. And the more that we become educated around these issues, the more that we are capable of doing something about it.
Well, with that, thank you very much, Louis. I would just like to ask if Louis or Stephanie or Elder Tina would like to leave us with any final thoughts before I share some resources with our members.
Okay.
I think preventive workshops are a wonderful idea, and I think the government should fund it, and I think it needs to go to every First Nations community, and then an Aboriginal representative to keep contact, and to really, let's not only concentrate on the woman, but let's concentrate on those kids, because you know that stays with a torn family forever, and you know that's pain too. And I still know grown-ups who are in pain, who have hurt, who are in addictions, saying my family was torn apart, my father was abusive, and now I'm abusive. So let's work on those kids too.
Also, I think the general population in Canada needs to be educated about what happened to First Nations, and to point out the fact that we are very resilient. Despite everything that happened to us, we are resilient. We are still here. Some of us still speak our languages. We've retained our cultural practices and our ceremonies. And so we are strong, powerful people.
That's right.
Mhm. And have some strong, powerful people, Indigenous, other women who are survivors, come and talk to connect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's okay to be a worker and behind the book, but once you lived it and you bring that in to connect to those people, they see themselves in people like me.
That's right.
So let's bring some of those kind of people in, and the government should be funding that as well.
And for all the women, there is hope to get out of a situation.
Yeah.
Don't have my daughter's permission to say this, but she was in a very abusive relationship and she got out of it. And now she is an associate professor at University of Victoria. So there's hope for women.
And I'm a survivor too.
Yes.
Before I met my husband, I was being beaten up every day for about 1.5 years. And the police knew about it. I had my nose on my face, hanging off of my face, touching my face. I have broken ribs and I'm a singer. And so I have scars. My head was split open. I have, things that stay with me forever. But I'm a survivor too. Mm-hmm. And I'm successful, strong, and healed. And there's always hope.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Stephanie and Elder Tina, for leaving us on the note of resilience, because there is incredible, incredible resilience in your communities and in Indigenous women. So thank you for reminding us of that, and that's something we always need to keep in our heads when it can seem very disheartening doing this work, to remember that there's resilience and there's hope always.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Leslie, thank you very much for sharing. We appreciate you opening your hearts and sharing your stories with us.